Let's take a moment and thank our sponsor, Text Control. There's always something new from Text Control. As a developer, do you need to integrate PDF generation, document editing, or electronic signatures into your ASP.NET Core or Angular applications? Or maybe you want to learn more about the differences between electronic and digital signatures. Text Control is offering a free consulting service to educate you about digital document processing and how Text Control products can help you add these features to your applications. You just go to textcontrol.com/contact and you can request your free personal consultation. How cool is that? Textcontrol.com/contact and you can request a free personal consultation from our friends at Text Control. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I am pleased to be chatting with Dr. Julie Gurner. She's an executive performance coach. You can check her out on her Substack at drgurner.substack.com, the ultra successful Substack. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
So you are an exec coach. The last time that I was exposed to an executive coach, at this level, is Wendy Rhoades, who's a character on one of my favorite shows on Showtime called Billions. And she works with some very, very high performance people in finance. And it appears on the show that she is their full-time executive coach. They have her on the floor. What is she doing? Is she just giving pep talks?
Yeah, well, what's really interesting is that hedge firms do employ performance coaches. Usually they will have even specific performance coaches for specific areas of their business. So they may have a coach that just works with quants, for example. But the character of Wendy Rhoades is interesting. I think a lot of people do believe it's kind of just a hype person and someone that, comes in there and gives them a pep talk. But the reason why we have a detailed background in her case, psychiatry, and mine, a doctorate in psychology, is that, we see people very much like, high performing machines. And with high performing machines, you can't hype a race car, for example, an F1 car around a track to really meet its potential. It really has to do with the mechanics. It has to do with the build of the car. And so we're really interested in deconstructing and kind of constructing this individual in these high seats to really position them to be the best that they can be and do their best work. That's really kind of what that character hopefully reflects and does by really understanding the person that she works with. She's able to really tune in and help that person overcome some challenges, rethink things, be able to make better decisions, and help to push that person forward.
Are you effectively getting people out of their own way?
I think that's, for the most part, that's a really great example is that we do get people out of their own way, but at the same time, there sometimes are points of challenge, even in their own personality, in their own way of operating, that can be blockers to their own progress. In my particular area of operation, the skills are never the problem. These are people who are highly skilled at what they do, and if they needed skills, would learn them, and they're very quick learners. So the only thing that really prevents them from being at the next level they want to be at is some element of the self. And so because they're problem solvers by nature, if you had a coding problem, you would hire an engineer who's good at that particular thing. These are people who say, well, clearly, if it's not a skill issue, there's something that I'm doing, and I need to hire a person who is skilled at understanding how humans function to be able to, help me get to that next level, who understands the nuance and kind of mechanics of who I am.
When someone knows that they need an executive coach, or they've been told by management, we're going to sign you up for executive coaching, are they always open to it, or are they often defensive because, who are you to give me feedback?
Right. That is a wonderful question, because me personally, I would not choose to work with someone who did not want to work with me. It's the same logic as somebody that, knows they have, if you know that somebody has a problem and they're not willing or open yet to solving that problem, you're not going to solve it. So I'm not here to convince anyone to be a part of a process which makes them more effective. I want people who are fully engaged, who are on board, and who are fully committed. And I wouldn't work with someone who was in a different position.
Now, this question might not be a good one because it's so kind of intersectional and complicated, but are there Are there cultural differences between, for example, East Coast and West Coast, North America versus European? Like sometimes I've felt as a person on the West Coast that perhaps East Coast people or New Yorkers, again, through the lens of media, maybe overanalyzed. Is it possible for one to overanalyze themselves? And in that process, maybe they just don't need that much analysis and self-focus?
I think that there are large cultural differences. I work with people in Singapore and India and the UK, around the world. Zoom has certainly opened up a wonderful way for people to operate. And I definitely see differences in how, what cultural norms are too, and the norms that are expected in the US from somebody in the CEO seat versus another country's CEO seat. How we express ourselves is certainly different. The way in which we fraternize with people is very different. The way in which we interact with our teams, what our expectations are and processes and things are all very different to some extent. But even within the US, I would say there are definitely cultural differences. And the West Coast is a little less brass tacks than some on the East Coast with some of the things that they expect. For example, the East Coast, you'll see a much greater emphasis sometimes on meetings start on time. They have there's a different type of energy around that type of aggression. West Coast can be incredibly aggressive in their technology and how the products they want to put forward. But it's much more of a monoculture at least in the technology world. Whereas in New York, you're one of many different businesses that are, successful or pushing yourselves forward. And in the West Coast, technology is everything, and how they think about themselves changes in that monoculture. How they measure themselves against others changes. Who they are in that sphere and how they think about themselves changes too. So there are different elements, I suppose. But all of them want to be successful. And so that's really my job at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like from the completeness and the correctness of your answer, you're hyper aware of such things, and you recognize that not all folks need to be coached in the same way. So you're adapting as much as they're adapting.
Absolutely. I think that that's a really important part of this, is that I'm not imposing, who I am onto people when they have a very specific style. I think people are most successful when they can lean into what makes them fantastic and ahead of the curve. We all have natural areas that we are exceptional. And if you focus on those areas and lean into them, you really get performance that outpaces, others who are just trying to, keep up in that particular area. I think that sometimes we get caught up on like, what does a great CEO look like? What kind of skills do they have? And we all try to fit in the same box, or an entrepreneur or an executive of, marketing executive or what have you. But I do think that while there is a base skill set that's required, someone in a CEO seat may believe, oh, I have to be brash, I have to be more loud, I have to be more extroverted. And so they're trying to push themselves into a mold that they kind of don't fit. And CEOs can be incredibly effective if they are more introverted or quiet or have a different style of operation. So in part, it's me helping them to leverage who they are by nature to be most effective in their seat and to do their best work. And people tend to be happiest in that position as well. They feel more confident. They feel more competent.
Now, on the show Billions, Wendy Rhoades works with quants and works with finance people. And it is an unapologetically, for what it's worth, capitalist show where success equals, another percent of some amount of money. It is about money. But you've used the term performance and you've used the term successful, but you haven't said anything about making money. So I assume that means that ultra successful within the context of your practice depends. What is success in this context for the people and the clients that you talk to?
I allow my clients to define what success looks like, and it's my job to line up with that definition to meet their goals. So if they say, hey, I want to position my business to sell and, I have an exit coming, or, I want to have a successful exit, it's my job to help them do what they need to do to get there. If they are somebody who has just sold a business and now they're trying to figure out what's next, that is, again, a definition that I will fall under and help them figure out and aim toward and be successful within. So I allow them to define it for themselves rather than to impose my own definition. But a lot of people do have very specific kind of revenue goals, monetary goals, business goals that are, for the most part, very capitalistic. I don't get a lot of clients who are, just want to be good people and are engaging me for that reason alone.
Right. And that's because presumably you are in the business of performance coaching, where performance is, in this context, business coaching.
Right. I mean, I'm a business expense, so that's the only way that I guess that I would be optimally used for them.
Now, you finished your PhD with honors in about 20 years ago. Did you go right into performance coaching, or were you a clinician and did you speak one-on-one with people?
Yeah, I did not know that this was an option for my career at the time. So my area of expertise was adult psychopathology and forensics, and I started in a very forensically tracked career. So I assessed people for competency at the time, competency to stand trial, mental state at the time of the offense to see if they qualified for the insanity defense. I did some work in a level 5 supermax facility. I've worked with people who are challenging, and have behavioral challenges as well, at the mental health unit where people are, locked down 23 hours of 24 a day because of the nature of the crimes they've committed and their inability to be socialized in the general population. So I guess I started there, and then I worked in a more traditional psychology setting. I've done work in academics, but really got into performance coaching because, when you do work in psychology, periodically you're approached by companies to be an advisor on products or other things. And I have a lot of expertise in personality, how people function and kind of their personality development and how they respond to certain things. And so, it was in advising one company around some areas that the venture firm reached out to me about a founder who was having some challenges. And I think they just didn't know anyone who had a psychology background but me at the time. And there was a founder who had just received a large amount of funding, millions of dollars. And this once very capable founder was struggling to make decisions, feeling really paralyzed by the amount, that they were given and, what to do next. I met with that person, just gratis as a nice gesture. We met for 3 or 4, few sessions, and he was back on track. His challenges were very clear to me. And, when you're somebody who does work that is often, takes a long time to get to the end point, especially in something like academics or in another area where you're working and you're pushing things forward and things take a long time, being able to see change so quickly and being able to see the impact so quickly and being able to identify it so quickly felt like hand in glove, and it was off to the races for me. I felt like there was a real need. And the more I explored the market, the more I realized, there are a lot of people who may have cognitive sticking points but aren't necessarily unwell people. And they could really be benefited by the expertise that somebody who understands human psychology brings. And so before the character of Wendy Rhoades, I started to do this work. I had a company that did quite well and had a very large exit. And so, I started to get a nice reputation, was able to build up a nice roster of clients. And, I've been doing this work ever since and really in love with it.
I like that term that you used, cognitive sticking points, as an engineer. That makes me feel like a bug that can be repaired as opposed to a fundamental character flaw.
I feel that way as well. We do have these points, generally healthy people still have points where they get stuck. They still have challenges that they face. They still have things they can't overcome that would really be benefited by the training that somebody has who is used to doing that in a level that is more geared toward pathology, but doesn't necessarily need to be used in that framework or with somebody who is ill.
Thinking about pathology, which you brought up, it reminds me about 4 years ago, there was a clickbait article that was based on some research that indicated that some non-zero percentage of CEOs had psychopathy, were psychopaths. You probably are familiar with that discussion. Mm-hmm. And now we have, it's a little bit blurry between CEOs and billionaires, but basically big successful capitalists with big personality issues and problems. In your experience, like in the C-suite, is that something that I, as the rank and file, should be concerned about? Or is that really just clickbait? Are these folks problematic?
I think that these are the ones who get a lot of attention, right? The people who have these wild, strong, brash personality characteristics are the ones that get the headlines. And so I do think that they are the ones who tend to take a lot of our attention. But you can look at people who are billionaires. For example, Oprah, I don't know that she has a lot of psychopathy that is kind of oozing out. And there are many others that we see that, have really done things that are fundamentally, not exploitive. They're not brash. They are not self-indulgent in the way that we expect, or kind of skirting the law, and have those dispositions. I do think that that is an issue at all levels of power, right? So you do see that, whether we're looking at people in government or we're looking at people who hold great power financially, we may see that power does have influence on how people's personality ends up evidencing itself and what it takes to get to certain levels. I guess I would say just because some folks do evidence that, I don't think that it necessarily means all do. And I think generalizing that is probably a mistake.
Yeah. Generalization in general is a mistake,
Yes,
as I make a
I
declarative
agree.
statement, and we'll see if that get. I was told once by a boss who I'd consider a friend, and I thought it was good advice, when I was kind of like low-key complaining about why I wasn't moving up faster, and when would I ever be a CXO or whatever? And he said, well, you don't have the personality for it. I said, what do you mean? And he says, well, you're nice. And I
Interesting.
thought that was a very interesting. I thought, gosh, I think there are nice CEOs. I think it's possible to do both. And I wonder sometimes, is capitalism something that just, the higher you reach, you have to be a problem? Or maybe there's just, like you said, quiet, thoughtful billionaires and CEOs that we just don't see because it's not fun news.
Well, I think that there's a big difference between nice and kind, right? I mean, nice, I think, is in some ways can be interpreted as inauthentic because we are trying to shape ourselves to the experience of the other person. Whereas, kind, you can be a kind and empathetic person and still hold lines. And sometimes that requires very challenging conversations to be a good person. For example, you would say, well, I'm a good person, I have a good moral compass, but that good person holds lines. Sometimes people who are interpreted as nice, they see them as someone who can't hold lines, or that would, not be able to hold certain lines that are important in the business, or be able to advocate for certain things that may be unpopular, or have certain hard conversations. And those things, are things that are easily workable, I think, with someone like me. I think that that's a kind of trait that we could easily correct. I think also, in those situations, people are often not self-promotional. We don't feel like that's a nice thing to do, and it feels terrible to do. But being able to surface the work that you do, be able to showcase what you're capable of and what you've contributed to and how you've contributed to it, is the only way people know really what you've done. And so there are ways in which we can, I think a lot of us are raised to be humble. And I don't think that humility helps our careers if we're honest about it.
Yeah, that's really significant. I appreciate that you pointed out the difference. I think that I may interchange those words, nice and kind, and I think I want to be kind. But sometimes I may be nice, which is swallowing myself rather than saying what it needs to be said. And this is a theme actually within your Substack, which folks can check out at drgurner.substack.com. In fact, just last month, you had a discussion on the word tenacity, which you called out as being fundamentally different from persistence. And that's another thing, nice and kind, persistent, tenacious. I might not split that hair, but you do. What is the difference, and why do people confuse persistence with tenacity?
The reason why I tend to split that hair is because of the words we use to describe our experience matters. And when we say, I've persisted, I have, I've pushed hard, and yet I'm not getting the results. Persistence is pushing and pushing and pushing and maybe not getting the result that you need. Tenacity is being willing to, not push unilaterally and to, find the side door, to be creative, to be resourceful, to be able to sometimes, shut that door altogether and go around and skip steps and do something else. Persistence tends to get one thing and they drive very, very hard at it. And I think that that can be beneficial in some areas, but sometimes with persistence, people can feel like they're doing everything right and banging their head against a wall because nothing moves. Whereas with tenacity, sometimes you do have to go around and use the side door, skip steps, be untraditional, be resourceful in ways that people wouldn't think about. And so I do like to split that definition a bit because I want people to see themselves as tenacious. And what does that mean? when you define yourself as tenacious versus persistent, how does that change the outcome of your behavior? The messages we tell ourselves about who we are determines a lot about what we do and how we move in the world. And so I hope to give people different language to define themselves and hopefully move forward in the world in a different way.
Yeah, I love that. I love these little small, I mean, almost pithy, and I mean pithy in a very positive way, things that we can almost say quietly to ourselves. I was told growing up in the 70s and 80s, we have these tapes that are running in our heads. I guess it'd be an MP3 now, but that repeated tape that you have in the back of your head. You said in your Substack, persistent people stick to the plan to get to the goal. Makes sense. But tenacious people may change their plan altogether. That reminds me of one of my favorite tapes, which was that efficiency is about doing things right and effectiveness is about doing the right things. And it sounds like, again, we're splitting words, but these words matter. And the reason I wanted to have you on the show was that in the world of programming, and the vast majority of the folks that are listening are techies or programmers, they are always struggling to name the thing, like naming in computer science and picking the right word. We'll sit down with a thesaurus and struggle to find the right word matters. And have you found that splitting those hairs can just light someone up and change their entire perspective?
I do think that precision matters. And I think it does change. If I can change how someone thinks about what they do, it changes not necessarily what they do this time, but what they may do the next time. If you just direct somebody and you say, do this thing, you get one behavior. But if you kind of teach them about the concept, you get a shift of behavior that is really something that continues in waves and you start to see in other areas. My job in some ways is I don't tell people what to do, but I help them to think differently so that actions from that point forward become shifted or changed in some important way.
When you say shifted or changed, is it a thing that happens in the moment when you're talking to them, or do they sleep on it and they wake up feeling different? Was it that they were thinking about it wrong?
Well, it's interesting because in the moment, I really do believe that sometimes, I certainly have experienced them and you may have too, where you have these light bulb moments, I call them, where a concept resonates with you and it just changes the way that you view a certain element from that point forward. But that isn't always common experience. So sometimes it does take, I'll ask people, here's a concept. Really think about it, write it through, do some journaling. I'll have people try different things out throughout the week and kind of test things in vivo so that then they can get back to me with some feedback. How did that go? How did that feel? Did that feel more authentic to you? Did it not? What kind of response did you get? How did your world shift a bit because you shifted in what you approached and how you approached and what you did? Sometimes it's just as simple as, if you're talking with people who are highly technical, one of the consistent challenges that I sometimes find is that people are not as transparent with their thinking process. So they can come to a conclusion very quickly, but other people in the room who are non-technical have no idea how you've come to that conclusion. And so being very transparent about how you communicate to people who are non-technical and laying it out and helping them see your process can be incredibly important, lend authority and help kind of bring them along in the journey instead of just getting to the end point where people kind of aren't sure how you got there. So there are different ways in which we test and move so that they can become more effective in what they do.
It feels like from reading your Substack and talking to you today that you really value flexibility and an acknowledgement, a deliberate practice that things change. And if you don't change with them, you're going to be pounding up against a wall.
I do believe that. I think that adaptability is a trait that wins over and over again. When, the pandemic first hit, for example, and people were struggling to shift, some people were very adaptable and said, hey, we're going to try to use this new technology. We're going to shift our business very quickly. Others really struggled to adapt. We see it both in large moments like that, but we see it in smaller moments too. And we see it in relationships. When people cannot flex, when you're too rigid, rigidity is where people end up having a lot of problems. When you can't flex to meet the moment, when you can't change, when you don't have openness to how you can be better, that keeps people very small. Rigidity will lock you in its practice.
But if you're too flexible, then do you stand for anything?
Well, I think it depends on what you are flexible around, right? You're not flexible around your core values, your work ethic, your morality, but are you flexible around and open, for example, around hearing other people's perspectives, opinions, ideas? Are you somebody who can hear it from not just your direct report, but somebody who works in an area that may not directly report to you, and now they have this fantastic idea and they were excited to speak with you about it? Are you open? Are you able to be flexible to see potential in other people who may not traditionally be reviewed in that way? So I do think it's really important where you flex, obviously. I think that there are things that should always hold firm, but I think people inherently also know where those areas are and hopefully can stay grounded and consistent in them. They make us predictable, right? And predictable people are trusted. They become reliable.
You are primarily a high level business C-suite coach, but is there a difference in a way that you would coach an executive at that level, or someone who had the street to answer to, versus someone who had more of a physical skill, like Simone Biles in gymnastics, or a surgeon, or someone who has a very hard skills job like coding that is not necessarily at that suite, that high level?
So I did the commentary for BBC on Simone Biles in the Olympics for her mental challenges of performance. So I was the person that they tapped for that commentary. And I do work with athletes at a very high level as well. I mean, at some level, if you think about you watch tennis or you're watching a high level individual athletic competition, in the top three spots, the skill levels are often very, very similar. So what is really going to determine who wins and who doesn't? It oftentimes will come down to, if you watch Wimbledon, you watch the US Open, if you were a tennis fan, the mental game is very, very important. And so how people are tuning into that and how they're developing that, and if they're, competing on an Olympic level, incredibly important. So I do approach everyone as an individual. It's incredibly important to me. Everyone is unique, but their goals are going to direct how we construct who they are to meet that moment. So if there's somebody who needs to, engage in high level competition, I want to know, okay, the end goal may be winning. I don't know, maybe it's a football game, or there's something that they have to do, or maybe there's something in basketball or hockey. So if you have a certain position, you have certain goals. And so we're going to look at what are the things that interfere in you meeting those goals? What are the things that need to be developed so that you can meet them? And really dig into that individual and who they are and partner with them to kind of get to that place. And it requires of them to be incredibly honest and vulnerable. But also, I always try to, and you'll notice this about tweets and everything else, or if we're still calling them tweets, but that, I always approach things from a place of strength. I want people to feel like they can sit in their own power. And I think that's incredibly important, because we often disempower ourselves rather than, others actively taking it from us.
You call out in your Substack that the internal reference point matters the most. But I feel like in the last 20 years, and particularly in the last 10 years, social media is algorithmically designed to make us feel bad about ourselves. And we don't understand that we are up against thousands and thousands of computer servers and more people than we ever thought existed. We are village people, no pun intended, who should be thinking about the 100 people nearest us, the local butcher, our family members, and maybe a cousin. And suddenly now we're competing against Instagram, which is showing us people who are algorithmically more successful than we are. How do we deal with that? And how has your practice changed as that has increased?
Well, one of the things I think I would note is that a lot of my highest clients aren't on social media, which is fascinating to me. So I would say most of my most successful individuals are really not on social, which is always very telling to me. They don't spend a lot of time on it. They don't really care about it. I don't think that it really serves them either to be there. So unless there's really a purpose, there would be no reason they would be spending time there. They're very judicious about their time, and I think they see it as kind of a lot of silliness for the most part. But I do think that for the majority of people who are on it, how are you using it, right? What is its function in your life? And being very deliberate and intentional about that function is a real key of using it to your advantage. If the function of social media is to bring attention to your brand, that's very different than just being online and looking at what everyone else is doing. If the function is, I'm going to follow 4 CTOs that are phenomenal CTOs and I want to learn from them. I want to hear what they have to say. I want to interact with them. Maybe I could ask them a question. That person's going to have a completely different experience than somebody who's just kind of in the wave of social media and being washed over by the algorithm. They are directing their experience. They're directing their life. Really, I think that the way in which I would position it is to be intentional, be directing your experience, be judicious about how you use it, be cultivating kind of your feed, whatever that is, so that it does serve a function for you. It serves you, and it isn't just using you as part of its experience. And think about how you see other people who are more, maybe more financially successful, maybe ahead of you in some ways in business. Are you looking at them as in jealousy or as inspiration? And if it's in jealousy and it's not helping you, I would be very cautious about how much time I spend on things that erode your particular mental space and your energy and ability to take on the things that would actually produce great outcomes for you.
When I coach younger and earlier in career people at my company, I remind them that why would you let a total stranger on the internet, a person who doesn't actively love you or want you to succeed, ruin your day?
What a wonderful thing to say. That's great advice.
Well, your advice has been fantastic, and thank you so much for spending time with me today. This has been really enlightening.
Certainly. Thank you so much for having me.
You can check out Dr. Julie Gurner at drgurner.substack.com or on her website. Go ahead and sign up for the weekly edition of Ultra Successful. We'll put a link in the show notes. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.